Imagine moving your family into what you believed was the perfect home, only to face harassment, beatings, and false accusations from corrupt cops, until your Navy SEAL brothers show up to turn the tables. "You don't belong here." That was the very first thing Derek Cole heard from his new neighbor the day he carried the last box off the moving truck. It wasn't shouted nor laced with anger, it was muttered, almost like a quiet warning. Derek tried to brush it off, but those words lingered in his mind as he stood in the driveway of his new house. In suburban Texas, sweat dripped down his forehead. His kids ran circles across the front yard while his wife called out for help with the remaining boxes. Derek was 37, a Navy veteran who had spent nearly 20 years serving overseas. He'd been on tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, seen the chaos of combat, watched men crumble under pressure. But what he wanted now was simple: peace. A safe street where his children could ride their bikes, a backyard perfect for Sunday barbecues, a home he could finally call his own. The house itself was modest but solid, a 2-story brick home with a wide garage and a green lawn that he couldn't wait to tend. For Derek, it was the reward for years of deployments and long separations from his family, a taste of stability. His wife, Simone, was radiant with excitement, already sketching plans for the garden. His son, Caleb, raced his little sister Mia down the sidewalk, their laughter echoing in the air. Yet not all the neighbors seemed as welcoming as they'd hoped. Some waved politely, but others lingered too long, staring silently. Derek noticed curtains shifting whenever he walked by, and hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when his family appeared. That evening, as Derek relaxed on the porch with a cold beer, a man in his late 50s approached. Slim, wearing a neatly tucked polo and khakis, clipboard in hand, he introduced himself as Mark Ridley, "President of the Homeowners Association. Mr. Cole," Ridley said in a clipped tone, "I just want to welcome you to the neighborhood. We have certain standards here, and we take them seriously. I'll send you a copy of our regulations." Derek smiled, trying to stay cordial. "Appreciate that. I take care of my home. You won't have any problems with me." Ridley's eyes flicked toward Derek's flagpole, where the American flag fluttered in the breeze. "That flagpole," he said, "looks about 2 feet taller than what's allowed. We'll need to address that." Derek blinked, momentarily stunned. "I served under that flag for nearly 20 years. I'm not lowering it." Ridley gave a thin, unfriendly smile. "We'll see." That was the first crack in the picture-perfect neighborhood Derek had thought he was stepping into. Within days, Ridley was back, this time complaining about trash cans being too visible from the street. Then the basketball hoop in the driveway, and later even the children's laughter being too loud in the evenings. It seemed never-ending. Simone tried to soothe him. "He's just the type who needs control. Maybe if we ignore him, he'll back off." But Derek knew better. He'd encountered men like Ridley before, people who pick at you, test your patience, and push until you react. One afternoon, as Derek was washing his car in the driveway, Ridley approached again. "You might want to watch how often you have visitors," Ridley said, glancing at Derek's cousin who had stopped by. "This isn't that kind of neighborhood." Derek set down the sponge, jaw tightening. "What kind of neighborhood is that?" Mark Ridley held his gaze for a long moment before replying simply, "One with standards." Then he walked away. The remark stung. Derek had fought too hard in life to let someone like Ridley make him feel like an outsider in his own home. He told himself he wouldn't let this man drag him into a fight, but a nagging feeling told him this was only the beginning. That night, as Derek tucked his children into bed, he found himself staring out the window, scanning the street. Ridley's car lingered longer than usual near the corner. Years of military training honed his instincts. Something wasn't right. Ridley wasn't just a nuisance. He was a threat, waiting for an opportunity to escalate. And the real danger wasn't just Ridley himself. It was who he called to turn grudges into power. The next morning, Derek stepped outside to grab the newspaper and noticed something taped to his front door. A bright yellow slip, official-looking, with bold letters at the top. Notice of violation. The reason? Improper placement of trash receptacles. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. The cans were exactly where city regulations required them to be. This wasn't about rules, It was about Ridley. Simone found him still standing there, the paper crumpled in his hand. "Another one?" she asked. "Yeah," Derek muttered. "He's not going to stop." And he was right. It became a rhythm. Every few days, another violation: grass too long, cars parked too close to the curb, decorative lights too bright. Derek meticulously kept records and took photos, everything he would need to prove that the complaints were completely baseless. But the constant harassment began to take its toll, not just on Derek, but on his family. One evening, while grilling in the backyard, his kids asked if they could invite some friends over from school. Before Derek could answer, Simone gave him a knowing look. She didn't want the children to feel punished, but she also didn't want Ridley to have more ammunition. "Maybe not right now," she said softly. Caleb frowned. "Why? It's just a sleepover." Derek forced a smile. "We'll do it soon, buddy. I promise." Inside, though, his anger simmered. His kids were being made to feel like they didn't belong, all because one man had decided they were the problem. Ridley's disdain was never subtle. He often lingered on the sidewalk inspecting Derek's property, jotting notes on his clipboard under the guise of politeness. Derek once overheard him talking to another neighbor, a middle-aged woman walking her small dog. "We'll get this under control, don't you worry," Ridley said, as if Derek's family were some sort of infestation. Finally, Derek decided he'd had enough. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and he was mowing the lawn when Ridley approached, papers in hand. "Mr. Cole," Ridley said, "your fence needs repainting. HOA guidelines are very clear." Derek cut the engine and wiped sweat from his brow. "Mark, this fence was painted 6 months ago by the previous owner. It doesn't need anything," Ridley smirked. "Our standards are higher than that." Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not going to let you keep harassing my family. My kids deserve better than this nonsense." Ridley tilted his head, a widening smile on his face. "Problem? There's no problem unless you want there to be." Then, almost casually, he added, "You know, a friend of mine on the police force lives nearby. Good man. He doesn't take kindly to rule breakers." That was the first time Derek had heard Ridley mention the cops, but something about the way he said it made it clear. It wasn't casual. It was a threat. Later that night, Simone tried to reassure him. "He's bluffing. He can't just sick the police on us," but Derek wasn't convinced. His gut told him Ridley had more influence than he was letting on, and the next week proved him right. Derek was driving home from work when flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, confused. He hadn't been speeding. The officer who approached introduced himself with a cold tone. His name tag read Halverson. "License and registration," Halverson demanded. "What's the stop for, officer?" Derek asked, handing over his ID. "Broken taillight," Halverson said. Derek knew it was a lie. His car was practically new. Arguing wasn't worth it. Derek kept his voice steady, hands visible, every movement deliberate. Halverson stared at him longer than necessary before finally letting him go with a warning. When Derek pulled into his driveway, he saw Ridley standing in his yard, chatting with another man in uniform. The second officer, Stockia, later introduced himself as Kyle Mercer. The connection was clear. These were Ridley's friends. From that point on, things escalated quickly. Derek began noticing police cars parked near his street, sometimes at odd hours. Once, on his way to work, he was followed for nearly 15 minutes. When Simone went to the grocery store, she returned shaken, saying a patrol car had circled the lot twice while she loaded groceries into the trunk. "This is intimidation," Derek said one night, pacing the living room. "He's using his buddies to make us feel trapped." Simone's voice trembled. "What are we supposed to do?" "We can't move again, Derek. This is our home." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "I won't let it happen." It was a Thursday evening when things finally boiled over. The sun had dipped low, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. Derek was helping Caleb with his math homework at the dining room table. Simone was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Mia chased their dog around the living room, her laughter echoing through the house. It was a moment that felt normal, almost comforting, until a sharp knock rattled the front door. Derek pushed his chair back and opened it to find Mark Ridley standing on the porch. Clipboard tucked under his arm, expression stiff, eyes darting past Derek to glance at the family inside. "Evening. Mark," Derek said, forcing politeness. Ridley wasted no time. "Your children have been creating a disturbance again. Several neighbors have complained about the noise." "This isn't a playground, Mr. Cole. This is a neighborhood of working families who deserve peace." Derek's jaw tightened. "They're playing in their own home." "That's not a disturbance." Simone, overhearing, stepped closer. "Is this really necessary, Mr. Ridley?" "They're just kids." Ridley gave her a tight smile. "Ma'am, rules are rules. If they can't respect them, there will be consequences." That word, consequences, hung in the air like smoke. Derek stepped onto the porch, lowering his voice. "You're harassing us. You've been on my property more in the last month than I've seen my actual neighbors. It stops now." Ridley didn't flinch. "I don't think you understand how this works. The HOA has authority, and I intend to enforce it." Then he leaned slightly closer, his gaze sharp and deliberate. He leaned closer and added, "You're not the kind of neighbor people around here want. If you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to someone else." Simone crossed her arms. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ridley's smile widened. "I think you'll find out soon enough." With that, he turned and walked back down the driveway, clipboard tapping against his leg. The door clicked shut behind him, and Simone exhaled sharply. "He's threatening us now," she said. "Derek, we can't let this go on." "I know," Derek replied, running a hand over his face. "But if I react, he'll spin it as me being aggressive. That's exactly what he wants." For a moment, the house was silent, save for Mia's quiet humming in the living room. The tension pressed down on everyone inside. That weekend, Ridley made good on his threat. Derek was mowing the lawn when two uniformed officers approached, Halverson and Mercer. Both moved with the casual confidence of authority, but their eyes carried something sharper, something calculating. "Mr. Cole," Halverson said, stopping at the edge of the yard. "We've had reports of aggressive behavior toward a neighbor. Derek killed the mower and wiped sweat from his temple." "Aggressive behavior toward who?" "Mr. Ridley," Mercer said flatly. Derek laughed bitterly. "Threatened him? He came onto my property again and told me my kids couldn't laugh in their own home. That's the truth." Halverson's gaze hardened. "Watch your tone. We're not here to debate. We're here to keep the peace." Simone stepped onto the porch, arms crossed protectively. "Officers, my husband hasn't threatened anyone. This is harassment. You should be questioning Mr. Ridley, not us." Mercer glanced at her, then back at Derek. "We'll be keeping an eye on this residence. Don't give us a reason to come back." They turned and walked away, but the message was clear. They weren't just enforcing the law. They were Ridley's enforcers. That night, Derek sat at the dining table long after the kids were asleep. His phone buzzed, a message from an old Navy buddy asking how civilian life was treating him. Derek typed a reply, hesitated, then deleted it. How could he explain that after everything he'd survived overseas, the real battle was now in his own neighborhood, against men hiding behind clipboards and badges? Simone placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat down. "We can't live like this, Derek." "I know," he said softly. "But moving isn't an option. And if I let him push us out, he wins. I won't give him that satisfaction." She touched his hand. "Then what do we do?" Derek stared out the window at the flagpole, the stars and stripes catching the faint glow of the street lamp. "We stand our ground, but we stay smart," he thought. "He's trying to bait me into making a mistake. I won't give him that." Simone squeezed his hand, but the worry in her eyes said she wasn't convinced. Derek wasn't either. He knew Ridley wasn't finished, that this was only the beginning. And when a man like Ridley decides to weaponize the law, the fight stops being about complaints. It becomes about survival. The weeks that followed felt like living under a microscope. Derek couldn't leave his driveway without noticing a patrol car creeping past. Sometimes it was Halverson, sometimes Mercer, and sometimes an unmarked cruiser that lingered at the end of the block long enough to make its presence obvious. To the outside world, it might have looked like ordinary police activity. To Derek and his family, it was surveillance. One night, Simone whispered as they lay in bed, "They're trying to scare us into leaving." Derek stared at the ceiling. "Yeah, that's the plan." Make us feel trapped until we give up. The harassment wasn't random, it was calculated. One morning, Derek was pulled over again, this time by Mercer, who claimed he had rolled through a stop sign. Derek knew he hadn't, but arguing seemed pointless. Mercer leaned against the hood of his car, taking his time with the paperwork, making sure every neighbor could see Derek sitting there like a criminal. When Derek got home, Simone was waiting on the porch, arms folded tightly. "Another one?" she asked. "Stop sign this time," Derek muttered. "Didn't even happen." Simone's eyes filled with frustration. "They're trying to build a case piece by piece. They'll paint you as hostile, dangerous, and Ridley will feed them every excuse he can." Inside, the kids were restless. Caleb asked why police cars always drove by their house and never stopped anywhere else. Mia, only 7, had begun closing the curtains whenever she saw flashing lights in the distance. These weren't the lessons. Derek wanted his children to learn about law, enforcement. The tension finally came to a head one humid evening in late June. Derek was taking out the trash when Ridley appeared. At the end of the driveway, arms folded, flanked by Halverson. The officer's presence wasn't casual. It was staged. "Evening, Mr. Cole," Ridley called out, his voice dripping with smugness. "Looks like your cans are still visible from the street. We've been over this." Derek set the bin down, forcing his voice to stay calm. "The city ordinance says they can't block the sidewalk." "They don't? You're making up your own rules." Ridley smirked and looked at Halverson, who stepped forward. "We've received multiple complaints. I'd advise you to comply," Halverson said. Derek crossed his arms. "Advise me or threaten me?" Halverson's hand rested casually on his duty belt. "We're here to keep order. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Simone came out of the house, her voice steady but sharp. "This is harassment. My husband hasn't broken any laws." "You're abusing your authority," Ridley tilted his head. "Careful, Mrs. Cole. Words like that can get you into trouble." Derek stepped between them, lowering his voice. "I served this country for years. I know the difference between keeping the peace and targeting a family. You crossed that line a long time ago." For a moment, Halverson and Derek locked eyes. Derek recognized the look, the same cold stare he had seen in conflict zones, the look of a man seeking dominance, not justice. Finally, Halverson muttered, "We'll be back," and walked away, Ridley trailing smugly behind him. That night, Derek sat at the kitchen table, replaying the encounter in his mind. Simone placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're setting you up," she whispered. "I know," Derek said. "But if I push back the wrong way, they'll twist it. I have to be smarter than them." The stress seeped into every part of life. Derek's co-workers at the auto repair shop noticed he was quieter, more on edge. Simone began avoiding neighborhood gatherings, tired of the stares and whispers. Even the kids sensed it. One night, Caleb asked, "Did we do something wrong? Why does everyone seem against us?" Derek's heart broke trying to explain. But the worst was yet to come. Late one Friday night, after a long shift, Derek returned home to find Mercer parked directly across from the house. The officer didn't move or speak, just sat there in his cruiser, headlights glaring at Derek's front door. Derek walked up to the car, voice calm but firm. "Is there a reason you're sitting outside my house?" Mercer leaned out the window, smirking. "Just keeping an eye on things, making sure the neighborhood's safe." "Safe from what?" Derek asked. Mercer's grin widened. "From troublemakers." Then he rolled the window up and stayed parked for another 20 minutes before finally driving off. When Derek walked back inside, Simone was waiting, her voice trembling. "They're escalating. What happens when they decide to stop watching and start acting?" Derek looked at her, mind racing. "Then we're in real danger." But what Derek didn't know was that the danger was coming sooner than he ever imagined, and it would arrive right at his front door. The day had been long and tense. Derek had stayed late at the shop, trying to drown his frustration in work, while Simone wrangled the kids at home. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the sky was black and the cicadas buzzed loudly in the warm Texas night. He was bone-tired, but his heart lifted when he saw the living room lights on and his kids' shadows dancing across the blinds. Home was supposed to be his sanctuary. He had just set his keys on the counter when a thunderous knock rattled the door. Simone froze in the kitchen. Caleb and Mia peeked from behind the couch, their bedtime routines interrupted. Derek's instincts flared. This wasn't just a neighbor. This was something else. He opened the door to find Officers Halverson and Mercer standing on the porch like predators, their expressions hard, posture rigid. Behind them, Mark Ridley leaned back with his arms folded, a smug grin plastered across his face as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Mr. Cole," Halverson said sharply, "we've had reports that you were threatening neighbors again. We need to talk." Derek kept his tone calm. "I haven't threatened anyone. This is harassment, and you know it." Mercer stepped forward. "Step outside, sir." "We're not asking." Simone's voice rang out from behind Derek. "He doesn't have to go anywhere." "Do you have a warrant?" Neither officer answered. Instead, Halverson shoved Derek in the chest, forcing him backward onto the porch. The sudden movement sent the kids screaming. Derek stumbled but caught himself, training kicking in instinctively. He raised his hands, palms open. "Don't touch me," he said firmly. "I'm not resisting." Mercer grabbed Derek's arm, twisting it behind his back, slamming him against the siding of his own house. The sound of his shoulder hitting the wall echoed down the quiet street. "Daddy!" Caleb cried from the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Simone rushed forward, but Halverson blocked her path. "Stay back, ma'am, unless you want to be arrested too." "This is my husband!" she screamed. "You can't do this in front of our children!" Derek gritted his teeth as Mercer forced his arm higher. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he refused to cry out. "I served this country," he growled. "I bled for it. And this is how you treat me?" Ridley's smug voice carried from the sidewalk. "Maybe you should have thought about that before moving here." Halverson slammed Derek's legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto the porch. His cheek scraped against the concrete as Mercer drove a knee into his back. Simone's cries filled the air. "Stop resisting!" Halverson barked, even though Derek hadn't lifted a finger in defiance. "I'm not resisting!" Derek shouted, his voice hoarse. "You're assaulting me in front of my family!" The children's sobs cut through the night, sharp and piercing. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street, shadows gathering behind curtains, but no one came outside. No one intervened. Simone screamed again. "Somebody call 911. They're beating my husband." Halverson pressed harder, pinning Derek down, while Mercer yanked his wrists into cuffs so tight they bit into his skin. The officers hauled him to his feet, shirt torn, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting," Mercer sneered. Derek stared at him, chest heaving. "You know damn well that's a lie." Halverson shoved him toward the patrol car. "Tell it to the judge," he said as they dragged him away. Derek locked eyes with Simone. Her face was streaked with tears, arms wrapped protectively around the children. He tried to reassure them with a glance, but the fear on their faces cut deeper than any wound. Inside the cruiser, Derek's mind raced. He thought of all the battles he'd fought overseas, the enemies he'd faced, the bullets he'd dodged. None of it compared to the humiliation of being brutalized on his own porch while his children watched. This wasn't war. This was something colder. The ride to the station was silent, except for the crackle of the police radio. Mercer glanced at Derek in the rearview mirror, a smirk playing at his lips. "Should have kept your head down, hero," he said. Derek clenched his fists, swallowing the fire in his chest. He wasn't afraid for himself. He'd survived worse. But the thought of his family alone, with Ridley circling like a vulture, gnawed at him. Back at the house, Simone sat on the floor with the kids huddled in her arms. Her voice shook as she whispered, "We'll get him back. We won't let them break us." Even she didn't know how. But Derek's arrest wasn't the end. It was the spark. And sparks have a way of catching fire when the right people hear about them. The next morning, Simone sat in the kitchen, staring at her untouched coffee, hands trembling. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Derek's face pressed into the concrete, his voice shouting that he wasn't resisting. The kids crying as the police dragged him away. Her phone sat on the table, filled with unanswered texts from worried relatives. But none of them knew what to do, and truthfully, neither did she. At dawn, Simone quietly dressed the children and drove to the county jail. They sat in the back seat, wide-eyed and fearful, clutching their backpacks even though they weren't going to school. When Derek finally walked out, bruised, cut, wrists raw from the cuffs, Mia ran to him, sobbing into his stomach. Caleb clung to his leg, whispering, "I thought they were going to take you forever." Derek bent down, pulling them close despite the pain. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed Simone on the cheek, noticing how pale she looked. "They didn't break me," he whispered. Not even close, but the damage went deeper than bruises. At the station, officers had booked him on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. When Derek asked for the incident report, the words made his stomach turn. Subject became combative, refused lawful commands, attempted to strike officers. None of it was true. The lies had been written as fact. Simone read it too, eyes wide with outrage. "They're rewriting the story," Derek said bitterly. "They're making you the criminal. That's what they do. They control the paper trail. Without proof, it's their word against mine." By noon, the gossip had already spread through the neighborhood. As Derek limped across his yard to retrieve the trash cans, he noticed neighbors whispering, peeking from behind fences. One man shook his head as if Derek were a cautionary tale. Another ushered his kids inside. Ridley, of course, strolled down the sidewalk with his usual smugness. "Tough night," Ridley said, feigning concern. Derek ignored him and kept walking. "You should think about moving," Ridley called after him. "Would be easier on everyone." Derek's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay silent. That was exactly what Ridley wanted, an outburst he could twist into another accusation. Later that day, Derek tried calling the police department to file a complaint. The desk sergeant cut him off almost immediately. "Mr. Cole, our officers followed protocol. If you feel otherwise, you'll need to file through the proper channels." "And what are those channels?" Derek asked. "Internal review," the sergeant replied flatly. "But I'll warn you, these cases rarely move forward. In other words, don't bother." That night, Simone sat with him, holding his hand as he stared at the bruises on his arms. "We can't fight this alone," she whispered. "They've already decided what the truth is. We need help." "Help from who?" Derek asked. "A lawyer. The HOA's got money. The police have the department backing them." "It's us against the system," Simone said softly. She was quiet for a long moment before finally asking, "What about your old team?" Derek looked at her, caught off guard. He hadn't thought about those men in months. They had all scattered after leaving the Navy, some to private security, some to civilian jobs, some disappearing altogether. But they weren't just men he had served with, they were brothers. And if anyone understood loyalty, it was them. "I don't want to drag them into this," Derek said softly. Simone squeezed his hand tighter. "They'd want to know. They'd want to stand by you. Isn't that what you all swore? To never leave each other behind?" The weight of her words hung heavy. Derek remembered nights overseas, shoulder to shoulder with men who had promised to fight for him as he would for them. He remembered Ethan McGraw's calm voice in the chaos. "We protect our own." His thumb hovered over the contacts list on his phone, unsure how to explain that the enemy wasn't overseas anymore. It was right here, wearing badges and wielding clipboards. Before he could decide, Caleb padded into the room, rubbing his tired eyes. "Dad, are they going to come back?" Derek pulled his son into his lap, holding him close. Not if I can help it, but deep down he knew Ridley and his allies weren't finished. The beating hadn't been the climax. It was just the opening move. If he didn't act soon, the next attack might be worse. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, he thought about the men he had fought beside. Men who understood what it meant to stand your ground against impossible odds. For the first time, Derek seriously considered making the call. Once word reached his old Navy SEAL brothers, this fight would no longer be confined to his house. The house was quiet, but Derek's mind wouldn't let him sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of a passing car felt amplified in the darkness. He lay there staring at the ceiling, Simone's steady breathing beside him, the kids asleep down the hall. His body ached from the beating, but the deeper wound was inside, the shame of being paraded in front of his family like a criminal. the helplessness of knowing Ridley and his allies were still plotting. Finally, he sat up and reached for his phone. Scrolling through his contacts, there it was, Ethan McGraw. Derek hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe longer, but the bond they shared didn't require constant upkeep. Ethan had been his commanding officer on their last deployment, a man with a sharp mind and steadier hands than anyone Derek had ever met. When Ethan said, "We protect our own," it wasn't just talk, it was a code. Derek's thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. He hesitated, not wanting to sound desperate, not wanting to drag Ethan into what looked, on the surface, like a neighborhood dispute. But this wasn't about property lines or HOA rules anymore. This was about abuse of power and the safety of his family. Finally, he pressed the button. The line clicked. After 2 rings, Ethan's voice came, grave and alert. "Cole?" Even at this hour. "Been a while. You okay?" Derek swallowed. "Not really. I need your help." There was no pause, no hesitation. "Where are you?" Derek exhaled, chest tightening with relief. "Texas. Small town outside of San Antonio." "It's bad. Really bad, Ethan. Tell me." And Derek did. He recounted everything, the HOA harassment, Ridley's smug threats, the officer's intimidation, and finally the brutal beating. His voice cracked when he mentioned Simone holding the kids while he was dragged away. There was silence on the other end. Then Ethan spoke low and steady. "Send me the address. I'll be there. And I'll bring some of the boys. You don't have to—" "We look after our own," Ethan cut in. "Always have. Always will. Sit tight." When Derek hung up, Simone stirred beside him. "Was that Ethan?" Derek said softly. "He's coming." "They're all coming." Simone's eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. "Do you think that'll make things better? Or worse?" Derek kissed her forehead. "I think it's the only chance we have." The next morning, Derek went about his routine, but there was a new energy in his step. Even as neighbors whispered and Ridley strutted by with his usual smug grin, Derek held his head a little higher. Reinforcements were coming. By evening, the first vehicle rolled into town, a black pickup with out-of-state plates. Out stepped Ethan McGraw, broader than Derek remembered, short-cropped hair, calm presence immediately steadied the air. "Cole," he said with a grin, pulling Derek into a firm hug. "Hell of a mess you've got yourself in." "Good to see you, brother." Derek's throat tightened. "Good to see you, too." 2 more vehicles arrived not long after, men Derek hadn't seen in years stepping out. Ryan Tate, who used to crack jokes even in firefights. Miguel Alvarez, quiet but fierce. And Sam Patterson, whose scar across his cheek told its own story. They weren't in uniform anymore, but the way they moved, the way they scanned the street the moment they stepped out. It was clear they were still the same lethal team Derek had trusted with his life overseas. It was clear the bond between them had never faded. Inside the house, Simone greeted them with gratitude, though worry lingered in her eyes. "I don't know what you all plan to do," she said, "but—" "Thank you for being here." Ethan gave her a reassuring nod. "We're not here to stir chaos. We're here to make sure Derek and the kids are safe, and that the truth comes out." That night, the men gathered around the dining table, the same spot where Derek had been helping Caleb with homework just days before. But now the conversation wasn't about math problems, it was about survival and strategy. Ryan leaned forward. "This Ridley guy, he's just a coward hiding behind his friends. But those cops? That's the real threat," Miguel added quietly. "If they think they can keep this buried, they're wrong. We can bring pressure from outside, media, legal. Whatever it takes." Derek shook his head. "They've already written their version of the story. No one around here is going to speak up. Everyone's too scared." Ethan tapped the table. "Then we find people who aren't scared. We shine a light where they don't want it. They can't bury you if the whole world's watching." For the first time in weeks, Derek felt something stir inside him, a spark that had been crushed under fear. By the next afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. Derek wasn't alone anymore. 4 new vehicles sat in his driveway and along the curb, and unfamiliar men moved in and out of the house. They weren't loud. They weren't reckless, but their presence was undeniable. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering behind closed doors. As Ethan and the others carried bags inside, their movements were precise, conversations low. It wasn't intimidation, it was discipline. Yet it unsettled people in a way Ridley's clipboard never could. Ridley noticed immediately. He pulled up in his silver sedan, parked halfway in Derek's driveway without asking, and stepped out with his usual air of entitlement. He crossed his arms and watched the men unloading gear. "So, this is the cavalry," he sneered. Ethan, standing near the garage, didn't raise his voice. "You must be Ridley. And you are?" Ridley shot back. "Friends of the Coles," Ethan replied evenly. "We're here to make sure their rights are respected." Ridley laughed under his breath. "Their rights? This is a neighborhood association, not a battlefield." Ethan stepped closer, calm presence carrying weight. "You're right, it's not a battlefield. So stop acting like a tyrant." Ridley's smirk faltered for just a moment, then returned. "Careful who you call names. I've got influence here, more than you realize." Ridley turned to Derek, who had stepped out onto the porch. "You think hiding behind your little military buddies is going to protect you? This won't end well," he sneered. Before Derek could respond, Ryan stepped out of the house and joined Ethan, his voice sharp and unwavering. "I've seen your kind before," Ryan said. "Guys who think power gives them the right to crush people." "You don't scare us," Ridley scoffed, muttering under his breath as he walked back to his car. But his tight grip on the door handle betrayed his unease. This was the first time anyone had stood toe-to-toe with him. That evening, the SEALs made their presence felt in another way. They walked with Derek and his family down the block, not as bodyguards but as friends. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact suddenly found themselves confronted with a group of men whose quiet confidence was impossible to ignore. No one said much, but the silence was louder than words. Derek wasn't isolated anymore. Later, Simone watched from the porch as Ethan and Miguel set up cameras along the exterior of the house. "We're documenting everything," Miguel explained. "If the cops show up again, there'll be no question what happened." For the first time since moving in, Simone felt a weight lift off her chest. She didn't feel alone in the fight, but Ridley wasn't idle. That night, a patrol car circled the block twice, headlights sweeping across Derek's lawn. Mercer sat behind the wheel, eyes narrowing as he noticed the cameras blinking red. He slowed, rolled down his window, and called out, "You think cameras are going to save you?" Ethan walked toward the curb, calm and measured. "They'll save the truth. That's all we need," Mercer's jaw flexed. "Stay out of this." "You're not from here." Ethan leaned slightly closer, tone still even. "Doesn't matter where we're from." "Wrong is wrong everywhere." The patrol car idled a moment longer, then drove off, tires squealing. Simone exhaled deeply from the porch, heart pounding. Inside, Derek sat with his old teammates at the dining table, the air heavy with strategy. "They're not going to stop," Derek said. "If anything, this is just going to make them angrier." "Good," Ryan replied. "Anger makes people sloppy. That's when they slip up." Miguel tapped his laptop. "I've already sent a packet to a contact in Dallas, a reporter who's covered corruption cases before. Once we have hard evidence, she'll run with it." Sam leaned back in his chair. "We've also got connections in the veteran community. Word spreads fast when one of our own is targeted." "Ridley and his pals won't know what hit them," Derek muttered, rubbing his hands over his face. "I never wanted it to get this big. I just wanted peace." Ethan placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes peace doesn't come by avoiding conflict. Sometimes you have to confront it head on. That's what we're here for." Simone listened from the kitchen, chest tightening at his words. These weren't men looking for revenge. They were men determined to see justice done. The next day, Ridley made his move. He called an emergency HOA meeting, claiming Derek's property was lowering neighborhood standards. It was a thinly veiled attempt to rally support. But when Derek walked into the community center, flanked by Ethan and his team, the atmosphere shifted instantly. People who had once whispered about Derek now avoided Ridley's gaze. The balance of power was beginning to tilt, but Ridley and the officers weren't about to surrender quietly. They were about to push back harder. By the following week, the tension in the neighborhood felt like a storm cloud that refused to break. Ridley strutted less than usual, but he wasn't done. If anything, the presence of Derek's old team had lit a fuse inside him. He doubled down, filing more HOA violations and sending letters warning residents that certain homeowners were undermining community standards. His words dripped with dog whistles. Though he never said Derek's name, everyone knew exactly who he meant. This time, Derek wasn't playing defense alone. Ethan and Miguel had already pulled together recordings from the security cameras, the night patrols, the aggressive confrontations, even snippets of Ridley's smug threats. Miguel packaged it all into a secure drive, along with Derek's bruised photographs and the falsified police report. They weren't just telling a story anymore. They were building a case. One evening, as the men sat around the dining table, Miguel opened his laptop. "I sent the files to 2 people," he said. "A reporter in Dallas who doesn't shy away from taking on crooked officials, and a veterans legal group out of Austin. Once they move on this, Ridley and his buddies are going to feel real pressure." Ryan leaned back, smirking. They picked the wrong man to mess with. Cole's not some loner they can steamroll. He's got brothers. Derek shook his head, still cautious. "They're not going to roll over." "Not Ridley. Not those cops. They'll fight dirtier now." He wasn't wrong. That weekend, a patrol car lit up Derek's driveway again, but this time, the officers didn't just idle. Halverson stepped out, snapping photos of the house like he was documenting a crime scene. Ethan walked outside calmly, phone in hand, recording everything. Officer Halverson. "What's the purpose of your visit?" Ethan asked. Halverson lowered his camera slightly, lip curling. "Routine check on private property without a warrant?" Ethan pressed, eyes flicking to the blinking red light on his phone. After a tense beat, Halverson muttered something under his breath and returned to his cruiser. Tires squealed as he drove away. Simone, watching from the porch, whispered, "If the cameras weren't here, they'd already be inside." Meanwhile, Ridley's grip on the HOA began to slip. At the emergency meeting he'd called, several neighbors spoke up for the first time. A middle-aged man, nervous but determined, stood and said, "Mark, this has gone too far. I don't care about trash cans or basketball hoops. We all saw what happened on Derek's porch that night. Kids shouldn't have to watch their father get beaten like that." Others nodded, murmuring in agreement. Ridley's face flushed red, clipboard trembling in his hands. "You don't understand. This man is a danger. He's disruptive." Ridley barked, but his words no longer carried weight. People had seen too much. Later that week, the Dallas reporter called Derek directly, voice sharp and professional. "Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the footage and your documentation. If you're willing to go on record, this could run as early as Monday." Derek hesitated. "Going public?" "It makes us bigger targets." Ethan, sitting beside him, gave a firm nod. "It also makes it harder for them to bury you." Derek closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke into the phone. "I'll do it. My family deserves the truth out there." By the weekend, the story broke online. Texas veteran alleges harassment by HOA and local police, caught on camera. Within hours, it spread across social media. Photos of Derek's bruises next to screenshots of Ridley's smug grin ignited outrage. Comments poured in from veterans, parents, and ordinary people across the country who saw themselves in Derek's fight. That same night, Ridley stormed up Derek's driveway, face twisted with rage. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You think your little media stunt is going to save you? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan stepped between them, calm and measured. "Back off, Ridley. This isn't your playground anymore." Ridley jabbed a finger toward Derek. "You just declared war!" Derek's voice was steady, unwavering. "No, Mark. You did. The day you brought cops to my door." The confrontation ended with Ridley storming off, but everyone knew the battle lines were drawn. The difference now: Derek wasn't fighting alone, and the world was watching. Pressure can only build so long before something breaks, and soon, the fight would reach its breaking point. The article hit harder than anyone expected. By Monday morning, local news vans were parked on the street, cameras aimed at Derek's house. Reporters shouted questions from the curb, while neighbors whispered nervously behind drawn curtains. For once, Ridley wasn't strutting with his clipboard. He stayed inside, blinds shut, phone pressed to his ear all day. The spotlight he had once used to shame Derek was now burning him instead. The police department scrambled too. An official statement claimed standard protocol had been followed during Derek's arrest. But the videos Ethan and Miguel had published online told a different story. Footage of Halverson shoving Derek against the siding of his home, Mercer twisting his arm while he shouted, "I'm not resisting," it was undeniable. The public wasn't buying the department's version. That evening, Derek stood on his porch with Simone at his side as a reporter asked, "Mr. Cole, what do you want to come out of this?" He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I want my kids to grow up believing that home means safety. I want people who abuse power to know they can't hide behind badges or titles. And I want my neighbors to understand that silence helps no one." The clip ran on the evening news across Texas, then made national headlines. Soon after, the veterans' legal group in Austin announced they were filing a civil rights lawsuit on Derek's behalf. Community members who had once kept quiet began reaching out, some admitting they too had felt pressured by Ridley, though not as violently. His power was unraveling. The SEALs kept watch, but their role had shifted. They weren't just defenders anymore. They were witnesses to change. Miguel coordinated with attorneys, Ryan managed the flood of support pouring in from veteran networks, and Sam reached out to families in the neighborhood, building bridges where Ridley had sown fear. One night after the kids were asleep, Derek sat at the table with Ethan. The weight of the past weeks was written on his face, but so was something new. Resolve. "I almost gave up," Derek admitted quietly. "There were nights I thought about packing everything and leaving," Derek admitted quietly. "But then you all showed up," he added. Looking at Ethan and the team, Ethan leaned forward, voice calm and steady. "Cole, you didn't need us to fight your battle. You just needed a reminder that you weren't alone. You've always had that strength. We just helped bring it out again." Derek's throat tightened. "I'll never forget what you all did for me." "For my family, don't thank us," Ethan said. "Thank the man who refused to bow down, even when they tried to break him." In the weeks that followed, momentum grew. Ridley stepped down as HOA president under mounting pressure, his smug grin replaced by defeated silence. Halverson and Mercer were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. While the system was far from perfect, Derek's story became a symbol. Veterans, families, and even strangers cited his name as proof that standing up, even in the face of intimidation, could make a difference. The Cole home slowly returned to what it was meant to be. Caleb and Mia played in the yard without Simone rushing to pull them inside. Neighbors waved openly, some even apologizing for staying silent. The American flag still flew high on Derek's pole, a quiet victory in itself. One Sunday afternoon, Derek gathered his old team around the grill. Smoke curled into the warm air as laughter replaced the tension that had once weighed heavily on the house. Simone poured iced tea for everyone, while the kids ran barefoot through the grass. For the first time since moving in, the house truly felt like home. Derek looked at Ethan and the others, then back at his family. "This is what we fought for overseas, and this is what we're still fighting for here. Home, dignity, peace." Ethan raised his glass. "To peace and to never letting the wrong people define it." The men clinked glasses, their bond stronger than ever. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Derek knew one thing for certain. Loyalty and truth are stronger than fear. The world had tried to silence him, but he still stood tall. Brothers at his side, family behind him, and a story that no one could bury. The lesson was clear. When people abuse power, silence only feeds them. But when you stand firm, especially with others by your side, you don't just protect yourself. You change the balance for everyone watching, so if you've ever felt outnumbered, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this story. Remember that even one voice, backed by courage and conviction, can make all the difference.